Ye framework, abi?
Hello.
Is it Ye2?
Yeah, security.
I need to explain now.
The phone is still sharing. All right. So this morning we'll be talking about security. Now, every one of us knows what it means to make our website secure. And with Ye2,
Matthew, can you go to a place where we could see you very well? Your light is not enough there.
okay. This somewhere I will start sharing it. So security in Ye2, just like any other framework, we can protect our web application. Ye2 is not an exception. Now, how can we go about doing that? We are going to explore some ways which Ye2 make that very simple. Now, the content we are going to discuss include the life cycle, because we need to understand how the framework works first before we talk about how we secure our web application. We talk about authentication, how to authorize users, then various ways which Ye2 use to accomplish authorization, which include access control, role-based access control. Those two things, we'll talk about those ways. Then the steps you can use to secure your web application if using Ye as your development framework. So the next slide. Is that okay? Now, application life cycle. How does the Ye2 operate? Every web application has an entering script. Same thing applies to this framework. Now, first, when you try to visit the site, there are some processes that work under the hood. The first step is that there is initialization of the application. Then the class, which is the autoloader, and the error handling is being set up. That is, all these things happen in the background. Then there's something they call registering of core application. Ye2 has what they call the app assets, as well as other things which need to be registered on each page before anything starts to work. Then after the registration, there's initialization. Then behaviors, which is very important in the framework. It is used to give rules to users. Now, these behaviors need to be registered as well. Then the static application, which is a component in the app, need to be loaded as well. All these are the processes. The moment you visit the site, Now, let's go to the chart. This chart by the right, you see the index.php. This is where every access to the website starts. It is a starting point called the entering script. Then when the users pass through the entering script, now this index.php will now route the user to the main application component. Now, this application component will need to visit what they call the controller. In my last presentation, I talked about the MVC approach, which you two use. It has a controller, it has the view, and it also has what they call the model. Now, the controller is where every people visiting the website will get to. Now, this controller decides which page should be visited. Now, it also checks the strength of the authorization which the user who is accessing this site has before such page is being rendered. Now, this controller is very important in this process because it will determine who is the user and whether or not he or she will access a particular page or not. So when you try to visit a page, you first get to the controller. Now, this controller now communicates with other components, which is the view or the widget. Now, after the widget as well is linked to the model because most of our work in the widget has to do with the model. Then we have the view. So this is just a general overview of how the framework operates when you try to visit it. Let's go to the main thing, which is authentication. Now, how does you authenticate? First, what do we mean by authentication? By the word authentication, it's just a simple answer to a question, which is, who is the user? Now, you are coming to my site. Who are you? Should you be given access? Okay, if at all you have been accessed and you pass the verification test, what role do you play in the website? So it's a way of identifying who a particular user is. Now, how does it work? The chart you have there still make use of the controller. The moment you visit any YE-powered application, you first of all meet what we call the controller. This controller has a various function. It contains all the actions of that particular website. For example, if you are trying to log in, you click on login. Normally, you expect that you get to the login page, but automatically you don't get to the login page. You first pass through the site controller.php. What it does is that it receives your request and decide what area is this request coming from. If you click on the login or the sign up, then it looks for the login action. This login action is where the manipulation takes place. Now, in that login actions, we will now authenticate you and decide whether or not you pass the authentication if you be going to the main homepage. So this is how the controller helps to check if the user is really registered. So from the login, the site controller calls the login action. Then the login action communicates with what we call the login form.php. This login form.php is another PHP script. This login form.php contains those rules. It is the authentication which we are trying to use to access this particular user is being taken care of by the login form.php. Yes, it has all the old rules which the user must pass before he or she must be authenticated. Then after the login form.php, it communicates with other components like the user identity.php. All those ones happen under the hood as well. And remember, you only access through the login page where you see the button that says login. Now you pass through all this process. Why do you have to pass through this process? It is a vital way which Yi is able to identify you as a user of this application. So Yi has a very robust authentication system which nobody can bypass, be it hacker or so. Let's talk about the next one, which is authorization. Authorization. What do we mean by authorization? Like I said, authentication asks who is the user. While authorization determines what level of access a particular authenticated user should have to secure a particular resource is controlled by the system. Lots of grammars, but what does it mean actually? What it means is this: authorization is not after you being a user. You can be a user which is registered in the website, but then what are those resources you can access? Do you have access to the main admin page? Or do you have access to what we call the board that is meant for, it could be the who has more knowledge in the website? So authorization will check you and know, being a user, what rules or what access do you have? That is what it has to do with. You can see the chart there. It describes how authorization works. We have users in a website. Then we have various kinds of users. We have the admin user, we have the author, we have the normal user. An admin user, like you know, manage other users as well. So how will you be able to identify who this particular user is? You are not checking if he is authenticated or not. You've done that with authentication. But now you are trying to see how you'll be able to know what these users can access. That is what authorization does for you. With U2, it is very, very easy. You can use that using two methods, which include access control filter and RDBAC. It means it's RBAC, not RDBAC, role-based access control. That is what it's supposed to be. It's a mistake. So now that is what you use. Let's take the first one, access control filter. How it works. Access control filter is a simple authorization method which is best used by applications that only need some simple access control. Okay, what it means is this: being another form of authorization, it is often used when you just need to simple check who the user is. It's a simple method as opposed to other, which is the rule-based access control. This access control filter is for basic website or some website that does not need much robust authorization system. And what it does is this: right from the site controller, I told you the site controller must be accessed first before you are being routed to any other pages in the website. Now, right from this access control, right from the site controller, the controller, there's what we call the behaviors. Now, is a function that is by default in U2. Each site controller can implement the function behavior. What it does is this: the moment you access the controller, the behavior will be able to check how much access you have to use this website. That is where access control comes in place. You can see in the return statement in the function, you notice what we call a associative array. Yes, the name is access. Then we see in the array, we have the class, we have only, we have rules. All those things has lots of great functions. Like the class will tell you who is controlling this particular, who is checking this user, if it is, he or she has enough authorization. Why the only? That only options tells you that, okay, fine. If this user is coming to this website, he or she has access to only the login, the logout, and the sign up page. Very simple. By that, you've already stated that this particular user does not have access to any other pages aside from those 3 pages. Now, you further state the rules because it works hand in hand. The rules is this: you're allowing the user to access the actions, which is the login and the sign up page. Now, what rules must this user have? For he or she to be able to access this particular 2 page we stated earlier on, he or she must have the rules of question mark. This question mark means he or she, whether authenticated or not, he or she has this access to the login and the sign up page, which means every user can access it. That rules question mark means every user can access the page. Now, the next one says allow through action logout. That logout, the rules is now the @ symbol. That @ symbol is a simple way of saying that if this user is not logged in, he or she must not access the logout page. You can see very simple. You don't need to code lots of things. By just putting these lines of code, you now identify that a particular user must not access that page if he or she is not logged in as a user. That is how it works using access control filter. All things made easier. Let's go to the next one, which is the role-based access. This is another form of authorization that checks for permission. Yes, it checks the role that is assigned to a particular user before he or she is able to access any of those individual pages we have on our website. Now, it works like the access control filter, but it is a more advanced method. This particular one, right from the sign up page, you are able to give this user a particular role. You can see this code snippet we have, the sign up page, which is the sign up function that treats for those who are trying to access the page and sign up. We see a conditional check, which is this validates. Now, we are trying to validate that particular user, and we are able to now check. Okay, we are able to now assign each of those properties in the user class to this user who is trying to access this website, like the username. Remember, all these properties are being obtained from the form, because we have those box where you ask the user to input username, email, set password, and also, so when we are able to get those details, we validate it. That simple check that is in the if statement, this does validate, is just what you need to be able to check if all the details that is being provided by the user match what is required. A good example is the username must be nothing less than 6 characters. The username must not have any maybe special character, or the password must be 12 character long, or it must have numbers, it must have special characters. That this.validate check all those things. You don't need to do much work in U2. All those things are being taken care of for you. Now, what you now do next is you need to now call what we call the authentication manager. Still within the sign up function, you see some things are being done below. You say auth, which is a variable, is being assigned to yield static auth manager. I'm trying to explain that particular line, which says the following 3 lines are added. Now, what happened there is that you are trying to give this user that is trying to sign up now a particular role. You can see the next line after that auth variable, you see get role author. That line of code simply assign the author to this particular user that is being signed up, which means he or she has the responsibility of being an author. He or she can edit a post, or he or she can delete other user, or do lots of other functionality that is only reference to author role. You can see role-based access control is very robust indeed, which means the moment you are able to give all the old rules or all the old roles to each user that is signing up, you don't need to bother about trying to check who is the user, if he is an author or not. All you need to do is when you are trying to access a page, you now load from the user class that if this user dot row equals to maybe author, he or she should access this. If not, deny access. All this is made simpler with a role-based access control. Indeed, we can conclude that Yi has a very robust authorization and authentication system. Now, what are we saying? Let's go to the next slide. The essence of all this talk is for us to be able to secure our application. Now, in case you are starting, how can you secure your application that is powered by the Yi framework? We have some steps. First, you need to be able to define the identity class. The identity class, just like any other class, is being extended by the user class, and it is used to check lots of, it is used to access some function that would have been otherwise not been accessed if you are not using the class. A good example is with the identity class, you are able to check if a particular user exists in the database. Yes, you can just check instead of you trying to type lots of SQL code to check that query the database, check this password, check this username. You don't need all those stress. With the identity class, you can just implement the class and just use just 3 lines of code. You are able to always verify that this user exists in the database. Very useful. So that is one step you can take to secure your EA application. The next step is for you to enable the login and the logout functionality. Every website that needs to be secured or that needs a way to be able to reference each user must have a login and a logout page, except you are trying to store those information in the cookie. But if you are not using a cookie-based system, you need to access the user through the login and the sign-up page. So you put those things in place. In E2, you don't need to worry because all these things are made easier. You just need to implement a class and edit some function in E2. Now, you need to enable the cookie-based login. This cookie-based login is just in case you are not making use of the sign-up and the login page. You are creating a website, like a good example is a store system, a website that you can go and purchase products like Jumia. Jumia does not need you to log in or to sign up. But you notice something in Jumia. By the time you visit Jumia the next time, you're able to check some things which you have stored in your basket. Yes, those things you want to purchase, in your basket. How are you able to see those things without log in or sign up in the page? This is because we have what we call cookie-based login. Yes, this cookie-based login is a way of this application or the framework storing some information in your cookie. Your cookie is just in your local storage. So the next time you visit that site, it only needs to retrieve those information from your local storage and identify you as the user who has visited this website before. Then it's able to retrieve your basket and do other kinds of functionality. All these things you need to put in place just in case you are not making use of the login and the sign-up system. The next step to take to ensure that your application is secured is ensure you implement the access control filter. That is what we talked about earlier on. Access control filter is a very good class or a filter that enables you to check who the user is and what page he or she. Very simple with just few lines of. Then not just implementing that, you need to undo authorization results. What do we mean by that? A good example is this user now is not authenticated, or this user accessing this page does not have the right, there's enough row. Like you are trying to access the admin board, which is only meant for the user who is. Now you are an ordinary user trying to access it. You need to undo the authorization result, which means if this user is not an admin, what should he or she see? That thing that displays that you don't have access to this page, or sorry, you cannot access page. By putting those things in place, you have simply undo authorization result. You need to put that in place. Also, this step 6 is for you to implement the role-based access control, which we discussed earlier on. Number 7, you need to configure the authorization manager. The authorization manager works hand in hand with the role-based access control. You cannot do without it. In fact, when we talk about role-based access control, we are mostly referring to the authorization manager. You need to configure that. Then you need to also define the authorization hierarchy. Now, if you are using the if you're using the role-based access control, you need to state some hierarchy. How do we mean by hierarchy? You need to identify how many users you need in this website. You need the admin user, you need the ordinary user, you need the manager, you need other kinds of user. Then when you're able to write down all these different types of user, that is what we call the hierarchy. You need to arrange them according to their strength of accessing resources. Like the admin user has a lot of functionality in the website. Yes, you need to state the hierarchy. All these things, once you have those things in place, you simply need to implement the role-based access control, which is provided by E2. And putting that in place, you are able to undo all of this authorization. All these things is made possible by E2, which makes it a very robust framework. Now, these are the steps you need to use if you want to try to secure your application. Please, let's go to the next page. In conclusion, we are saying that Y2 offers a great security option when it comes to security that has to do with authorization of user and authentication of user. All of those things are done just very easy in Y2. And it is another framework which makes it easier for you to be able to achieve authorization using the RBAC, the role-based access control, or the access control filter. Either of those two methods, you can secure your application in Y2. Now, we also say that Y2 has an entering script, which means before you can access any other page, there is one page that every user must access. A good example is the index.php. The moment you are trying to access www.bincom.com, let's assume Bincom was created with Y2 framework. The moment you access that, you first of all need to get to the index.php. Then from index.php, it calls the controller. Now the controller will then check who is accessing this particular place. He or she, what is the strength of the roles, and what does he or she has to access, and what does he or she not have to access. Then from there, you are able to route the user to the respective page he or she is looking for. So everything is made possible with just a simple framework called Y2. So in case you are considering a very good PHP framework to go for, I will recommend Y2 framework, because I don't know if most of these features exist in other framework, but based on my knowledge, in Y2, all these things are made easier. So I don't know if you have any question. Please, let's go to the next page. Okay, before you, ask questions, please. Before I start to ask my own question, do you have any question for me, please?
I have a question.
All right.
So my question is, you said Y2 made everything easier, and it will detect automatically who is accessing this by using RBAC, if I'm
Yes.
right.
Yeah.
An access control filter, something like that I mentioned. So my question is, when it comes to Y2 framework, does Y2, using Y2 framework, do you have to have a back-end site or the same site that will just automatically detect who the user is? I don't really understand that part.
Okay.
Because you mentioned Bincom.net, Bincom.com as an example.
Yeah.
That if a user is trying to log in, that Y2 will to take you to something called PHP or something like that, and it will detect who is accessing it. Do you mean it won't have two sides? There are some sites that if you want to log in, if you want to do some changes, you have to log into their backend. Something like that.
Okay.
Is it something like that, or I don't really get? Maybe you should just question.
Okay, thank you for that question. I understand the question. Now, in Y2, we have the advanced templates. This advanced template has the back end and the front end folders, which means when I am trying to develop a website in Y2 Advanced, I am working for both the back end logic and the front end logic, which means from the back end, I can implement all those things I made mention of, like the access control, the role-based control. Now from there, in fact, with those two things in place, I can always still implement it, who is accessing the website. Like a good example is, if you are trying to create a website that is meant for the admin and for the login user, well, I won't advise anybody to create a sign-up page for the admin user, because the admin user needs to have a special email and a special password to access. But just in case you want to create a website that identifies two types of user, now in Y2, you can use maybe a checkbox where you say, are you a company or a user? The moment the person checked that box, the role-based access control is being initiated. Now, what it does is that if that box is true, if anybody checked that box, I can now implement that role-based access control to assign that user who is trying to register as an admin or a company. So that is how it works. Now, if you try to log in again, you will not see the page that is meant for an ordinary user. You will see the page that is meant for the admin user or for a company user. If he or she did not check that box, automatically this role-based access control will assign this particular role called the user role to that particular user who is trying to register. Now, what it does is that the moment this user tries to access this page again, he will never see anything related to the company or to the admin. He will only be seeing pages that is meant for user. Like I said, all you need to do is to implement a class called the role-based access. The role-based access control is a class. The moment you implement this class, you need to edit some things and do some little programming into it. Then you link the sign-up page to it to always check this user coming in. That is how it is made easier. So you can always do that. You can always do that. I don't know if I in any way approach your question, because if you have any further question, you can ask, please.
Yeah, you've answered my question. Thank you.
I have a question as well.
Yeah, Priska, what's your question?
Yeah. My is it?
I'm hearing you.
Yeah, can you hear me now? Hello?
Yes, I can hear you.
What is happening? It's network. Hello?
We can hear you, Priska. You can't hear us. It's your network.
Ask your question.
Hello?
We are hearing her now.
She can't hear us.
Can't hear us. So
Priska, I can hear you.
maybe it's the network. Our network is bad.
Please, who have question again?
Someone else, please.
Hi, Matthew.
Who is speaking?
If.
Oh, Ife Alpha.
Fine. So you just made me fall in love with PHP today with your presentation. The nice one. So I wanted to ask. Now you were saying, so the essence behind this framework basically it is just protect the website from hackers, security and stuff like that. So I don't know that framework you can use. I'm talking about SQL, like SQL injection and stuff to protect. I know that most times you can also use SQL injection to protect users from hackers and stuff like that. Are you hearing me?
I'm hearing you. I'm hearing you.
So I'm asking, so is the main essence of this framework just to protect
For
users
security.
from hackers? Yeah.
No, just like any other framework. In fact, framework is an extension of a programming language, which means with framework, you don't need to do much of coding. Most of the class, you only need to require the class to work. Like in year 2, by default, it is working with Bootstrap. So since you two support Bootstrap, which means a lot of front end is done with Bootstrap. So all your designs and everything, you work with Bootstrap, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. But when it comes to the back end logic, U2 has many components for various purposes, like for security. I made mention of what it's used for authentication, which is the filter. What is for authorization? Only that, there are a lot of things. In my next presentation, I'm going to go more into security. You see how it does a lot of other things, like in the login. In U2, if you are trying to log in, you only need just one word in your back end, which is required. That word, any user that tries to click on the login that does not fill the box will never get to that place. You only keep seeing the red. Just one word required. Lots of those work has been done in the class. You only need to implement that class, or you only need to require the class into your back end and do some coding. So G2 is meant for both front end and back end, but it's used to create a fully functional website of any kind, not just for security.
Oh, so cool. The last question. So if I create a bot now, if I create a bot now, it's not possible for me to bypass any dependency inside the website.
You said?
So if I write a bot, can you hear me?
I'm hearing you, continue.
Yeah, if I write a bot now, Probably to
Okay.
gain user details and stuff, also see if there's any loophole in your code. With the UE
Okay.
framework,
Okay.
it won't be possible, right?
If you are trying to hack it with a bot,
Yeah.
best of my knowledge, I said it's not possible because this is just I only made mention of 2 security in the tool. We have about 16 security measures in the tool. There's what we call the CRFS. That one, you will never access some pages from the GET request. Most of the hacking is being done on the maybe where you have to type the or. If you want to type those things, there are some pages you will never access from the address box. It must always be through the post, which means the one that is already designed by that developer, which means if you don't pass through that place, you will never pass through, you never get to that destination. In U2, you just need to implement that particular class again. In fact, securities is very robust in U2. Not to talk of the front end logic. With Bootstrap, you can do a lot of things with U2.
And lastly, is it possible to make use of API with E? Is it possible?
Okay. Yes, U2 has API. In fact, API is working with API is very best in U2. Unlike you trying to create a lot of things, maybe a lot of classes to handle your API. In U2, most of those works is done for you. All you need to do is just for you to state how you want your API to be. It will automatically create the API for you. In fact, that is just a breeze in U2.
Okay, so in a nutshell, I believe, okay, from judging what you have said, to create a well-secured website using UT, you I would like to know, you need an API like a third party in between your website and your E2 so that to protect users, right?
Well, I don't get you well, but the answer is yes. What I feel is what you are trying to ask is anything that has to do with security, you should go for it too. I will recommend it for you as well as any other thing. But we have Laravel as well. Laravel is powerful. In today's century or in today's world, U2 is competing with Laravel. But I can tell you, U2, if you go to U2, you won't want to go to any other framework again.
All right, thank you very much.
You're welcome. I think that is the end of my presentation because it's almost time already.
All right. Thank you, Matthew, for this morning. Okay, just a quick one. Samuel, Femi Oluwasoaga and Bayo, you came in late, and that means you didn't attend at all.
Bayo, you came in late. You don't take traffic.
Huh? But I was able to get most of what I said.
You were?
Most of everything. Because I was able to get most of what he said about role-based access control.
You came in late. You and Samuel Oluwafemi Soaga.
Sorry.
All right. I was also hit, by the way.
Hello, sir.
Ma? Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning, everyone. I think we are supposed to be 2 presenters today. Just one person presented and did not talk further.
Yes, he said he's ready, but due to some network constraints, I had to tell him that he should prepare for the next cycle. All right. Have a good day, everyone. A happy weekend.